This class is going to be about the basics of the color page, and we're going to go in detail about a lot of different tools that you have in the color page to get you started. So I have some of these clips over here. Some of them are shot on drone, some of them are S-Log footage, and some of the clips are from Red. I haven't added the clips from Red. Let me just add them. So let's move into the color page. The first thing that you notice is this screen, which is the output screen that, whatever color grading that you're doing, you're going to see in the screen. Below it are the clips. These are the thumbnail previews of anything that you've edited in the timeline, one after the other. This is like a very good way. When you're in color, you don't need to see the timeline. But if you want to see the timeline, you can come up here, and in these controls, you can simply select this timeline option, and then it can show you where exactly you are in the timeline. So it's much easier for you to navigate. But to get a bigger view, you can turn a lot of controls on and off to get a bigger view and work in more precision. So let's say we start off with this clip. Now, if I play it, what is going to happen is that it's going to move on to the next clip that I have in the timeline. But when we are working in color, it's much easier if you turn on this loop button. There's the loop button. If you select this, it turns to orange. And now when you play it back, it's going to loop around, right? It's going to play back again and again so that you can simply work on this specific shot and then move on to the other one. So this is how you loop the footage, okay? So these are the tools that you have to manipulate color, right? You have color wheels, you have camera raw options, then you have these HDR wheels, then you have these curves, qualifier, and all those things. We're going to go in detail about them. So this side of the window, you're going to see all the tools, and this side, you can either turn on the scopes or you can, turn on the keyframes. Keyframes in color page are used to shift from one color to another. Let's say you had somebody in the shot, let's say he was wearing a red shirt, and during the shot, you wanted to change the color from red to yellow, right? So you would use keyframes. This is a very simple example. You can use keyframes for a lot of different things as well. And I'm just going to turn on the waveform. You've got a gallery option over here. Let's say we have done some grading in here and we want to save that grade. I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to grab still. This is going to save my grade and my look over here in the gallery. Then you have LUTs over here. Now let's say you've shot something on Sony and you quickly want to put in a LUT and convert it to exactly the Rec 709 look that you want. You shot on Sony S-Log 2 perhaps. So these are the LUTs that are going to help you do that. Simply I'm going to turn it off right now. You've also got media pool, but I think media pool has nothing to do with the color page. The timeline that you have created in the edit page is locked, and then that locked timeline comes to the color page, and then you're just allowed to do the color stuff. So then we have this. If we turn on these clips, we are not going to see the thumbnails. If you want a bigger view, you can turn these clips off. Then you've got these nodes. So what are nodes actually? They are like layers. The way you work in layers in Photoshop is the same way you apply different nodes in the node tree. So a node is the set of information. It's the set of the corrections that you have done in this specific panel, and then you can add another node and do some more corrections in another node. There might be a lot of questions that why do we use multiple nodes? Why can't we do our work in one simple node? The answer to this is going to come later on when we're going to do the qualification, and I'm going to explain you why you would need more nodes to work on. A simple explanation right here would be to keep your color grade more organized. Let's say I'm working on primaries first. I'm just correcting the exposure. I'm just adding some saturation. I'm just balancing out the image first. I do that in one node, and then I move on to another node, and then I can go for the stylistic looks, and then in another node I can select the skin tones. So this is how the nodes work. So this little green is the input, that is the original shot that's going into the node, and anything that you apply here, let's say I increase the highlights of this shot, the gain, and I decrease the shadows a little bit to get more contrast. So somewhere here, and let's add some saturation, 75. Okay, so I've done some basic corrections on this node. Now, a very good workflow in working in the color page is when you're adding any nodes, it's much better to label those nodes. So if I go and right click on this node, I'm going to see node label. If I click this, I can add in primaries, right? And this shows me that I've done primary corrections on it. Any of the panels that is used in this node is going to have this orange dot in here. So if you click a node and you want to see what you have done, which tools have been applied to this node, you can come here and see that you have got this orange dot over here. So now that we have got a good exposure, let's add in another node, and to add that other node, I can simply right click on it and go to add node and add a serial node. So what is a serial node? Serial node is basically a node that is coming after the primaries that we have done. So we have done the primaries, we have added saturation, we have adjusted the exposure, and now we're going to do another thing. Now all these corrections are going into the second node, and whatever we apply to the second node is going to be applied over the primaries that we have done. Let's label it and call this secondaries, and let's add in some blue in the shadows perhaps. So I'll simply go here, add a little blue, and add some warmth in the highlights. And simply, if I want to see that what I have done in this specific node, I can simply come to this number here that's saying 02. If I click it, it's going to disable the node. So that means all we are seeing is the primary correction. This node is not being applied to this. So if I click it again, it's enabled. So a very quick way of doing this is that you can simply press Command D on Mac or Control D on a Windows laptop or a computer. So I can simply press Command D and it's turned off, and Command D and it's turned on again. And if you want to, let's say you have like 10 different nodes in your node tree. If you want to turn them off, all of them, you can simply press Alt D and all of them would be turned off. And you can press Alt D again to turn them on again. And you have this little bypass color grade option as well. So you are also going to find this option in the edit page as well. So if you click this, every color correction that has been applied to it is removed and you're seeing the actual footage that you had. So now we have added the secondaries. Let's add another node, and let's say I want to change the color of a shirt. Let's name it color change and go to the qualifier, pick up this. Now you have different options in the qualifier. You have an HSL qualifier, you have an RGB qualifier, you have a Luma qualifier, and then you have a 3D qualifier. So for shots that are more complex in colors, you can use a 3D qualifier, but most of the times to isolate the skins and select different colors, the HSL qualifier is very quick and does a great job. So I'm going to select this orange color. Now that I have selected this color, I'm not able to see what I have selected. For that, I can simply come here, and this is the highlights mode. If I turn this highlights mode on, it's going to show me what thing is selected in the shot. Rest of the area is gray. So anything that is selected is going to show up in this. So I can also turn it on by pressing Shift and H, and Shift H, you can come back. So to see the selection, it's better that you turn on the highlights mode after you've done the selection. And then you've got these hue, saturation, and luminance controls in which you can play around and find exactly what you want in the shot. So now, let's increase the saturation a little bit. Let's make it softer. As I move towards the less saturated side, it's also getting all those things that are on the less saturated panel, right? If I want to also select something that is darker, I can move it towards the darker, the luminance slider, and I can even widen it up. And then just to double check, what you can do is that you can move it around the hue to see that you are at the exact selection possible, right? So doing a qualification with these controls is much easier. I know you can also use this picker add tool or picker subtract tool, but the thing with them is that they're not very precise, right? So a better way to do it is that select a color and then just adjust these sliders to exactly get the key that you want, right? So now we have selected this, and I'll just press Shift H, and now I know that I've got a selection. You can see it in this thumbnail, in this node thumbnail over here as well. So now I simply go to the color wheels. I can go to any tool and change it now because I have selected that thing. So I'll go to the color wheels, and now if I change the hue of it, what it's doing is that it's changing the color, right? And to get a good selection, what is necessary is to, get a softer key. So I'll go back to the qualifier and add a little blur to it so that the color shift is like a bit softer, right? This works great for skin tones as well. When you're selecting skin tones, make sure that you make it much more softer. You increase the blur radius, and you can also play around with the clean black, clean white, the same way you're used to working with them in the green screen. So that thing done, and now if we play it forward, we can see that we've got a good selection. I recommend putting in a lot of time when you're doing qualification, because this is something that is the key to good grades. And whenever you need to pick up the skin tones, don't worry about it if it's taking a lot of time. So be patient and work on that. So now move on to another shot.
Sorry, question. जो शर्ट का कलर था वो ब्राउन था, स्किन भी ऑब्वियसली इसमें कलर होता है ब्राउन का, तो जब मैं शर्ट का चेंज किया था तो ऑटोमेटिकली वो स्किन का भी चेंज होता है, तो इज देयर अ वे कि मैं सिर्फ शर्ट का चेंज कर पाऊँ स्किन का?
Yeah, so now let's move on to another shot and let's see that how do we select specific portions of the footage when we have the same color in the background and we have the same color in the skin and stuff like that. So let's move on to a shot, and we're going to select the skin tone, the blue side of the skin tone. And we've selected the blue light that is hitting on her skin. So if I go to the color wheels, let's bring it more towards the warmth, right? Let's add in some yellow so that we have even kind of a skin tone. So if I press Command D, now you can see that that shift is actually affecting it. Now this thing is also affecting the hands, and let's say for this shot we don't want to include the hands in it and we just want to include the face, right? So for that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the power windows. Now these are little masking tools that you have. So you have done the qualification, now you're telling Resolve that the qualification that I've done, I just need that qualification in this window. I don't want it outside of that window. So I'm just going to come here, and you can select the presets over here, or you can, by the pen tool, you can draw it around. I'm just going to select a preset for the skin, a circle. So you can notice that if I bring it to the hands, it's going to change the hands, and if I'm bringing to the face, it's going to exactly stick to there. These little things are for the softness. So you can also increase the softness from here, or you can drag them around and work with them. Now the problem with this shot is going to rise when we play it forward, because this clip is moving and we perhaps lose her at some point in the clip. So simply, another tool that we're going to explore now is a tracker. So any power window that you've applied can be tracked, right? So I go to the tracker over here, this tool. I go to the tracker, and by default I have pan, tilt, zoom, rotate, and 3D selected. For some shots where you don't require the 3D perspective to change, you can uncheck these options, you can play around with them and see what works best for you. Now I'm going to select this track forward and reverse option because we are in the center of the clip and we want to track to the forward and we want to track back to the first frame. So I'll just select this option, and you can see how quickly it has tracked the face for me and it's sticking to the face, right? Now let's say we remove this node and I add another node by pressing Alt S, and now I want to work on the look. Let's talk about the primary color wheels. Primary color wheels are basically something that let you set the exposure of the shot in an overall manner, right? So if this is the offset, and if I adjust anything in the offset, let's say these sliders are for adjusting the exposure, right? and this little dot, if you move it to any side, it's going to shift the color to that side. Now in the offset, what happens is that anything that you're doing is applied as a whole to the image. So if I add in a yellow color, it's applied to the whole, it's applied to the shadows, midtones and highlights. Then we have lift, gamma and gain. Lift is for the shadows, gamma is for the midtones, and gain is for the highlights. So let's select this shot. So if I increase the exposure in the shadows, it's going to increase the exposure in the shadows, and it's also going to be affecting some of the midtones, right? This is what the primary color wheels are for, right? They adjust the clip overall. So I'm just moving it down and bringing it to a position where I find a good contrast. So then I'm going to go to the gain, move it up a little bit where it's like more believable. Let's add some saturation in here, 80, and we've got a good looking clip now. If I turn it on and off, you can see that we have kind of converted it from the log to a good color space. And then if you want a more something more in the midtones, you can increase the exposure a little bit in the midtones, and that way you'll have a softer shift. You'll have a softer shift from the highlights to the shadows. So midtones are like gamma is used for that. Now let's understand the difference between the color wheels and the log wheels. Now when I have selected these wheels, I have other options in here as well. These are the primary color wheels that we were using, and then if I go to the next option, I have primary color bars, and then when I go to the next option, I have log color wheels, right? Primary color bars are exactly the same as the primary color wheels, just they're in the bar form, and they are adjusted through the RGB channels and the luminous channels. But the log wheels, they work in a different way. They work specifically on the things that you want to work on. So we are here and I've selected this second node, and now in the color wheels, I'm in the log wheels, right? So offset works in the same way. The offset works in the primary color wheels, but in the log wheels, if I introduce some shadow, some green in the shadows, you can now notice that I have some green in here. If I've added this green and I go to the low range up here and I move around the low range, what's happening is that if I increase it, it's applied to a lot of other different things as well. If I decrease it, it's just going to go to the darkest portion. And this way I can selectively work on my grade. The same thing applies to the highlights as well. Let's say I want to, this wall, I want to make it a little more warmer. Let's add some warmth in the highlights, and there's a high range over here. So if I set the high range too low, what's going to happen is that it's going to affect all of the image. If I'm going to reduce it, it's just going to be applied now to exact spot that I want it to be. So I just want it to be on the walls and on these stairs. So let's say this thing. So if I turn it on and off, now you can see that we have selectively done the secondary grading on it. So whenever you need to specifically target the shadows, highlights and midtones in your scene, you should always be going to the log wheels. And anything that's in between, the range that you've set, anything that's in between are going to be the midtones. That brings us to the curves. The same thing that I did in the primaries, I'm just going to go to the primaries node and I'm going to reset the exposure changes that I've done. By clicking this button, every exposure change has been resetted. Going to go to the color wheels, reset it, and now let's do the same thing with the curves. So if I move this upper portion towards the left, is going, these are my highlights, and it's going to blow, increase my highlights. And if I'm going to move this portion to this side, it's going to reduce my shadows. So let's reset it, and let's add a point over here by clicking over here simply, and let's create a good S curve, a very smooth one. So I'm simply going to go to the color page and color wheels, just going to add saturation again, and we've got the same thing but with the curves. So let's come back to the original position where we had our primaries with the color wheels. Let's add another node. Then you've got a hue versus hue curve. So this is a curve that allows you to change a specific color. We changed the color with the qualifier before, right? Now let's use this curve, hue versus hue, and let's go and pick this color, blue. So it has added a point on the blue. And if I move the point up or down, what it's going to do is that it's going to change the hue of that specific color that I've selected. Let's reset this, and now let's go to the hue versus saturation. So let's say you want to increase the saturation of the blues that are there in the doors. So I select this, right? And I just simply, if I increase it, it's going to increase the saturation of those blues. And if I reduce it, it's going to reduce the saturation of those blues that I've selected. So just reset it, and let's go to the hue versus luma. And in hue versus luma, what happens is that you can change, let's say I'm going to select this blue again, and I've added a point over here, and simply if I increase it, it's going to increase the amount of the luminance. If I decrease it, it's going to reduce the exposure in it. I'm going to reset it. Then you've got luma versus saturation, and this is very useful for creating good grades, because let's say you have added cyan in the shadows, but in reality the things that are totally dark in the scene should be looking black, right? So you can simply go to luma versus saturation and select a point in there, and you can simply drag it down so that the darkest portion are looking black. And this is the same thing that applies to the highlights as well. So this is a very useful curve, can be used in a lot of other different things as well, and there are a lot of other curves. You can play with them and see what they can do. Most of the work that you're going to be doing is going to be in this panel right here, because you've got contrast, you've got the tint, you've got the temperature. We are in the primaries again, and we change the temperature to something more warmer, right? So we can do that. If let's say you have a tint in the footage that is looking green or that is looking on the magenta side, you can play around with this tint, and that can go towards magenta and that can go towards green, right? So I'm going to leave the HDR tools right now. They have a lot of details and you can see what they can do, but most of the things you can do in the primaries for the start. Then you have this RGB mixer as well. Just going to the other node, and I can play around with different settings and different things in the RGB mode. So then you have noise reduction in here. So noise reduction is a studio version effect, and this can only be applied to the shots where you have a studio version, right? If you have a free version, it's not going to work in that. You can select the mode of it, faster, better, or enhanced, and you can select the radius of the noise that you have in your clip, and then you can simply increase the threshold and see if it's working. So we talked about the color panels, we talked about noise reduction, curves, color picker, power windows, tracking, and then there is magic mask. Now this is also a studio only thing, and this is a very great tool to work on. Let's change the label and magic mask. So what this does is that, let's go, okay, let's select her. So I'm in the magic mask, I'm clicking this add tool, and I'm simply going to draw a stroke over here. So if I turn this on, it's going to show me what it has selected. So I'm going to add another over here. So she is selected. Now this guy is also selected. Let's remove him. And now we have got a very good selection of her. Now this is a wonderful tool because it used to be a very difficult job to mask out objects. Now the thing is, we have just done it on one frame. Now how are we going to get it on all the frames that we have in the footage? Simply go here and press track forward and backward. Okay, so can you just imagine what we did in seconds? Like, isn't it a game changer? That is something that is, I think, going to make your mind to shift towards Davinci Resolve. So, this red overlay is actually showing me that which area of the footage I've selected. Now I have done my selection. Now let's turn on the overlay, guys, please. So now we have her selected and she is isolated in the image. Now let's say we just want her and we want to replace the background like this, right? Just going to come here and add alpha output in the node tree, right? What it's going to do is that it's going to give me just this person which is selected. So if I click it and if I connect it to the alpha output, now if I go back to the edit page, I have her selected and I can add a background. For color grade, it's way too good. But to make it like make this mask really nice, you can go to the color page again, and in the magic mask, you can work on some other adjustments like denoise it a little bit, right, and increase the blur radius. Now you've got a softer selection and you can add something in between. But I was talking about it in regards to color. So I'm going to delete this alpha output, and let's say we want to do all the crazy stuff here and we want to, let's say, bring her and make her like a blue person. Let's make her, and now let's say I want to select something at the background and change the color of the background, and that should not affect her. What I can do is that I can add a layer node over here. Now that's where you'll add layer nodes, right? I'll right click on here and I'll go to add node, add a layer node. Now in Photoshop, how layers work is that the top layer is going to show first and the layer at the bottom is going to be the second layer, right? But in Resolve, this first link is actually something that is at the back. So this link is going to be something, this below link is going to be something that is on top, right? So I'm just going to remove these and I'm going to connect this to the lower side, connect that to the upper side, just going to adjust it so that it's easier for us to understand. Node label background. Now, I hope you understand this idea. Anything that's going into the layer mixer and that is at the bottom is going to show first. It's the top layer, right? And this is the layer below it. So now we have magic mask selected and we have like graded it, this girl. And now let's say we want to change the background to something like this. This can be done in the layer mixer. So I'm just going to remove it, going to go to the magic mask, and let's say I want to keep her exactly the same colors she is in right now, and in the background I just want to reduce the saturation. So that's how you do it. That's like, it's pretty easy to do. Now what is it doing? It's bringing in the secondary, it's bringing in something from the secondary, the color grade that we have done, and it's only selecting this girl over here through the magic mask, and because nothing else is selected, it's just going to be pasting this girl on top of this background. So that's how layer mixer works. So that was the magic mask. Let's move on. And now this is a footage from a red camera. This is a art 3D footage and this is a raw file and it has been shot on anamorphic lenses. So I'm simply going to go to this camera tool over here, and whenever I have a footage that is raw, all the raw camera settings are going to show up in this panel. So if you have a footage, you just go to this panel. It's selected to currently decode using project, and you can select it to decode using clip, and then you've got all the settings. It's giving the color space. You can change the color space to your liking. You can adjust the ISO, and this is all happening before the footage is converted to log or any color space. You can also work around with the color temperature, and color temperature changes that are done in the raw tab are much better than when you apply the color temperature to a certain clip in the nodes. So that's why people prefer shooting on it. You can see all these settings. You can work around with them and see what they're doing. And let's say you want to size something, right, in the color page. So you can simply go to the sizing option over here and you can zoom in, you can tilt, pan, you can do all those fancy things over here. So now let's talk about the key. So let's go to this shot that we graded. So let's say I have added this warmth. Let's say this is a little more warm, and I want to reduce this effect. This specific node, I want to reduce the opacity of this node. So I'm simply going to go to the key, and this is the key output. If I bring it down, it's going to decrease the opacity of this effect, right? So if I bring it to 1, it's full opacity, and if I reduce it, it's like dialing down a little bit. And you can see over here that it's turning to gray. That means that this effect is applied a little less than a full effect, right? So this is the opacity of the layer that you work on. Let's go to a shot like this, right? Alt S, another node. Let's go to effects and add this mirrors effect. Okay, so if I add this, I can like move it around, and I can like move the position from the sliders as well, the angle of it as well. So I can do a lot of things in here. So let's say I wanted to, add in a movement in here. That's just to, I'm showing it to you so that you can understand doing keyframes in this. So let's say I'm on this point and I've got this keyframe option. I'm going to select it to this, and let's reduce the center size, right? Let's put in a mark over here, a point. Now if the point is orange, if I move on, that means there's no point. If I come to the start, there's a point and it has turned to orange, right? So I've set a point over here. When I come to the end, let's set another point, and let's kind of make it like this, right? And if I play it forward now, it's going to be like that.
Keyframes का nodes के साथ
They are placed in each and every node that you're working on. So I was working on this node, and these are the keyframes of this effect on this node. If I want to come back to this key, let's say I go back to the warmth, there's no effects over here. So if I go to the this node which has mirrors effect, I'm going to see these settings. Now let's say we have a similar shot like this in the timeline and want to grade it similarly. Okay, we need to go to the color, memories, and save memory A. Now this has saved the grade for us in the gallery. If I go to the gallery, now if I select this and move it down a little bit, now we have a grade over here that's saved, right? And let's say I want to apply it on this clip, right? All I'm going to do is going to go to color, memories, and load memory A, right? Now instantly whatever I've done, it's pasted on it. Now mostly when you're working on similar clips, you've got a similar tone. You apply that tone, and when you go to the other shot, you can simply go and adjust the, I'm going to the primaries. I can adjust some of the shadows, which are too dark, and that's it. That's how you paste the grade. You can save it in like all of the memories that you have. One thing that's left, and that is Lightbox. So this is, when you click this Lightbox, what it does is that it gives you a whole preview of the timeline. Let's say you have 100 shots in here, and you're going to watch all those shots. This is a very handy tool that lets you see that if your grade is like going pretty similar, or if there are shots that are off the grade. So this is a very handy tool, just like a storyboard. It's a good tool to see how whole of your edit is going.